What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys for checking out the new channel. Something I've been thinking about doing for a while, and when I first started YouTube, for those of you that may not know, I was thinking about doing a movie channel. I was kind of neck and neck with sports. Obviously, I'm glad I picked sports. I have so many great supporters, and hopefully some of you guys came over to check this out. But obviously, you know, there's nobody better to do it with than my brother. We used to constantly bicker and argue about, you know, why was this movie better than this movie, why this movie was sucked. So, you know, we definitely have conflicting opinions, but one movie we definitely do not have a conflicting opinion on is going to be this one. And I figured, what better way to start out with than kind of do a sports theme, being that I'm a sports channel. And Rocky, I mean, just so happens to probably be in both of ours top 10 or 15 movies of all time. But kind of want to introduce my brother Greg and, yeah, let you guys know what he's all about. And then we're going to jump into the movie.
Yeah, my name's Greg. Glad to be here. Like you said, you know, Rocky's one of these movies that I've probably watched a couple hundred times throughout my life, and I think that's one of those movies that most people have watched numerous times, at least throughout their life, and that a lot of people could actually relate to. I mean, it's, you know, easily one of the best. It's probably easily the best sports movie, if you ask me, and like you said, probably in my top 10 movies of all time, I would have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic movie, and it's not what makes this a great movie. It's not just about sports. There's obviously a love story involved. It really is, and it's like most sports movies. It is the ultimate underdog story.
Yeah.
You couldn't get more of an underdog story, and we're gonna start with the, you know, when we get into how he wrote it. It was made in 1976. It was directed by John Avildsen. I think that's how you pronounce it. But the really cool fact about this movie that a lot of people don't know, it was written by Stallone. Stallone wrote it in 3.5 days.
Yeah.
And then he was given the opportunity. They offered him, how much money they offer him?
They offered him, you know, originally the companies, they wanted to buy the script from Stallone and have somebody else act in the role. They're talking about either James Caan or Burt Reynolds, and they offered him $350,000 for the script. And it's $350,000 back in probably back in 1975 even. And yeah, you're talking about a serious amount of money there. And we're also talking about a time where Sly Stallone was not exactly rich and wealthy. They say he only had $106 in his bank account. So when somebody offers you $350,000 when you're living like that, I mean, you could imagine, you know, it's got to be extremely tempting. But he opted not to take that money and to hold out because he felt that, you know, starring this movie would, you know, basically do what it did and change his whole entire life. And not only does it change his life, but I think it's changed a lot of other people's lives by playing such an iconic part.
Yeah, and part of the story also, I don't know if you said it, he was to the point where he was ready to sell his dog, wasn't he?
Yeah, and actually his dog is the dog that pops up in the movie, is Buckus. Yeah, that's how hard times he'd fallen on. He was literally thinking about selling his dog to somebody in order to come up with money for rent.
So, yeah, so I was talking about how this movie is literally the ultimate underdog story, and it starts and ends, really, with the guy who wrote it and stars in it, Sylvester Stallone, and he was that passionate about playing this part that he said he could have used that money, that $350,000 50 years ago. Let's take this into account, Greg.
Millions.
That's $7, $8, $9, $10 million today.
I mean, you offered somebody $350,000 today. Today, that's still worth a lot of money. Forget about even what it would be worth.
Right, and that's how passionate he was about this project, that he knew he had to play the part, and I think that is that's probably the coolest story about this movie in terms of the backstory. And
I mean, again, it's that underlining underdog story. I mean, it's the same thing, you know. Basically, you know, the ultimate story of Rocky is the underdog story, and Stallone, by having, you know, by what he did with this movie, he was the underdog. You know, in a lot of ways, he lived this.
Right, and because of that, he is so perfectly casted. But it's not just him. When you look over the cast, Talia Shire, I think it's Talia Shire. Yeah, who plays Adrian. Perfectly casted. Burt Young, perfectly casted, who was Paulie, her brother. Carl Weathers is Apollo Creed, who was lightly based off of Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, and I would say Rocky was also lightly based off of Joe Frazier and Rocky Marciano.
And what about the fight? And obviously Burgess Meredith, who played Mickey, but what about the fight? There's a backstory to that as well.
Yeah, in real life, there was a fight between the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, and a guy called Chuck Webner, who was basically a journeyman fighter. It was basically supposed to be a tune-up, but during the fight, Chuck Webner actually dropped Muhammad Ali, and for that 1 second, he was the best in the world for that one moment. And that's basically where Stallone came up with the idea for this movie. He was actually at that fight, and that's where you got inspired.
Great stuff. And the other thing that really stands out to me in this movie, specifically in the montage scene, and we're going to get to that. My favorite scene in all the Rockies. I mean, that's what you wait for. But the music,
Oh, yes.
by Bill Conti, think about it. If you're listening to this right now, if you've ever worked out, if you've ever gone to a gym, if you've ever ran, there's a high probability that you've worked out to the music from this movie from 50 years ago.
Almost almost certainty that you've used this at some point while working out. I mean, this is the workout theme.
Yeah, the workout theme, and it's crazy how it's not just a movie; it's things from within the movie that stand the test of time.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's so much about this movie that stands the time. Not only, I would say this is not only the greatest sports movie of all time, but you can make an argument it's one of the greatest love stories of all time, too. Because that's where the heart of this movie really comes from, is the relationship between Rocky and Adrian.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. That's why it won Best Picture. It also won Best Director, Film Editing. We'll get into a real interesting fact later on as we go through the podcast about the angle in which it was filmed, and they kind of brought that to the forefront with the training scenes. But let's start with the movie. And really, it starts out with Rocky as a bum. Let's be real, that's what he was.
Yeah.
He's fighting Spider Rico, who you later see actually in the newer series, in the Rocky Balboa movie.
Yeah, he's in the Rocky Balboa movie. They bring him back. The opening scene, you see him what they would call a smoker, basically, which is a fight that takes place in a small type of place. A bunch of people basically smoking cigars and getting rowdy around the ring. Nothing like what eventually during the main event at the end of the movie, where it's in this huge arena. I mean, he's fighting in these dark places, and at the end of the fight, at the end of the opening scene, when they go into the locker room in the back and you see the fighters getting paid, Spider Rico, after all of his fees and dues and stuff, makes $17 for losing the fight, and Rocky makes $40.55 for winning the fight.
Yeah, so imagine that. You get your brain beat in for 15 rounds or however many rounds it went, and you get paid $40.55, and he goes from that, at that point in the movie, the lowest of the low in terms of the sport of boxing. We're going to get into, he was a debt collector for the mob. I mean, you're talking about jobs that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And he goes from that. And another thing of this movie that I think it really signifies when, I know we're skipping ahead, but they're just, it's a podcast, thoughts going through my head. Obviously, Apollo Creed at the end of the movie and throughout the series is really known for the American flag, right? He's wearing the hat, he comes out as, and it really does kind of signify the American dream, where if you put your mind to something, it's the land of opportunity. Exactly. And that's really what this movie is about. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was fighting for $40, and he wakes up one day and the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, undefeated,
never knocked down. I mean, he gets the shot at him, he takes the shot, and he does what he can with it. He stands up, he stands toe to toe with the best.
Yeah, and he gets the golden opportunity, and that to me is another theme of this movie. Is just that. But, after that fight, then it starts to bring you into the character of Adrian, which is such an important character, not just in this movie, but the whole series. She's kind of his crutch.
She's the heart and soul. Rocky and Adrian's relationship's the heart and soul of not only this movie, but I would say this series. And there's that first scene where where they introduce Adrian, where Rocky goes to the pet store, and he's trying to get her attention and talk to her and stuff like that. And Adrian's so shy that if you watch that scene, there's actually not one line of dialogue from her. She's pretty much just trying to hide from Rocky, just hide and get away from him because of how shy she is. I mean, Rocky's another person who's socially awkward in his own way, which makes the chemistry between them even more interesting, I think.
Yeah, that scene was kind of painful to watch. It's almost like when you're in like 3rd or 4th grade and you don't know what to say, and you're playing like games and you don't know what to say to the girl. She doesn't know what to say to the guy. The whole scene, she doesn't say a word. They're both incredibly socially awkward, but that's who they are as people, and they kind of help each other grow, and that's what the love story's about. But, that's the nuts and bolts of it early on. He then goes on to buy Cuff and Link, who were the names of the 2 turtles that he bought in the movie. And another interesting fact, which I couldn't believe. Now, keep in mind, Rocky Balboa came out in 2006. Those turtles from the movie in 1976, we're talking 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years later.
30 years later.
They are in the Rocky. They're the same turtles are in the Rocky Balboa movies 30 years later. So those turtles actually outlived most of the cast for the Rocky movies.
I need that fact checked. If anybody can fact check that, I still refuse to believe it. Who kept the turtles for 30 years?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe Stallone kept them in his back pocket for all I know, but I'm 100% sure those are the same turtles 30 years later to pop back up in the movies.
Because it's not like, it's the type of animal that you could kind of tell that it's a turtle. Nobody's looking at the turtle to see if it's the same exact turtle 30 years later. But I'll tell you what, man, that's dedication.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this whole movie's about, dedication, right? That's the underlying theme to the Rockies, I'd say, right?
Yeah, so then he gets Cup and Link, goes to the pet store. They have their first discussion. He later comes back. He asks her out on the date. I know he did to the basketball game. Actually, was that was the second encounter, right?
Yeah, second encounter he goes back there, and I think the second time he goes back there is only again one or two lines of dialogue from Adrian. She's very quiet, very shy. But I mean, that's the character building. I mean, sometimes you don't need to say anything in order to build these great characters, which Adrian ultimately is.
Right, and then you have the scene early on in the movie where you kind of first get introduced to one of the most iconic characters in the Rocky series, that of course being Mick, and Rocky loses his locker, and that's kind of where you first start to see Mick kind of give up on Rocky.
Yeah, there's that great dialogue there where Rocky goes, I've been coming here for 6 years. For 6 years, you've been giving it to me. I want to know why. And Mickey goes, you want to know why? Because you could have been great, but instead you became a leg breaker. And he goes, yeah, well, it's a living. And Mickey goes, it's a waste of life.
Right, which another thing that we kind of missed there that I wanted to talk about, where he was a leg breaker, which is what he talks about, which is what his job was with the mob. But in the first scene where you see him as the quote-unquote leg breaker, he has to collect, I think it was $200.
Yeah, it was $200 that he was supposed to collect, and the guy only had, I believe, $130. He was $70 short. And I mean, Rocky was told to break this guy's thumbs if the guy came up short on money. But I mean, at the end of the day, Rocky's this guy with a good heart, just throws a hard punch. But I mean, he doesn't really want to hurt anybody, so he lets the guy slide. And the following scene, he catches some crap for that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where you start to really grow some love for Rocky, even though he may not be the most relatable guy in certain instances. He's a guy that you can clearly tell has a good heart. He means well. He's just in a really tough situation in his life.
Yeah, which is another thing that I think most people watch this movie can probably relate to. I mean, we've all been in these tough situations where it feels like there's no way of getting out, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the inspiration of this story. I mean, where do you want to go from here? We go so many places from here. You could talk about the first date with Adrian. You could talk.
Yeah, I think we should definitely talk about the first date with Adrian. I mean, Rocky finally gets. Actually, the way it plays out is Paulie tells Rocky that his sister's expecting him. Paulie's sister being Adrian, and Rocky goes over to the house, and Adrian doesn't even know that he's coming there.
Right.
And then Rocky asks Paulie, what does she like to do? And Paulie says she likes to ice skate. So they go ice skating. And there's actually there's an interesting story behind that. In the ice skating scene, it's only Rocky and Adrian. I mean, there's the one extra of the guy who was supposed to be running the place that opens it up for them. But originally, there was supposed to be like 30 to 50 extras in this. But because of, restraints on budget, because this whole movie was actually done $1 million budget, which is extremely low even back then for a movie like this. But because of the budget, they weren't able to get any extras. So the scene went from being a scene that was supposed to have 30 to 50 extras to having absolutely none. But I mean, I think ultimately it works very well that way, the way it played out.
Yeah, and at the, in that scene, I obviously remember, I think it was the guy in the Zamboni. He's cleaning up the ice, the rink's about to close, and Rocky offers him $8 for a set of skates, because he doesn't skate. He talks about that throughout the scene, and to get the ice for 10 minutes. He offers him $8 or $7, and then he talks him up to $9 or $10, and then they get on the ice rink, and that's really when the chemistry between Adrian and Rocky starts to develop.
Yeah, they have that great dialogue in there where Rocky is talking about how when he was a kid, his parents told him that he didn't have much of a brain, so he should make sure he develops his body. And Adrian responds to that by saying it's actually pretty funny because growing up, my family always said that I didn't have much of a body, so I might as well start developing my brain. Which is where you see those it's like almost like two puzzle pieces that seem to be that they could click together perfectly, and you see that this chemistry it's probably ultimately going to work.
Yeah, it's kind of like the old adage, opposites attract, and then that like her strengths are his weaknesses and vice versa. And like you said, that's where you start to see the love connection. And then that's where you first learn, unless you're, watching the movie, really closely early on when he fights Spider Rico. But it's really the first time that you learn that he's a southpaw, which is an interesting fact in the movie and an important fact. I think that's part of the reason why Apollo Creed initially struggles with him, because he's that, that he's disoriented. It's not, fighters are not used to what a southpaw means is he's a left-handed boxer. Fighters are not accustomed to fighting a guy like that because most people are right-handed.
Yeah, in real life, I mean, southpaw is the type of thing that many champions don't want to come up across. I mean, historically, it's very common that champions have been dethroned by southpaws, not necessarily because they're more skilled, but because of the awkwardness of the fight. So him being a southpaw definitely plays a major role into this movie.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. And then he just, and then he tells the whole story about how I think the guy's hand was pointing towards the south, and when he was in Jersey. And by the way, let's talk about Philadelphia real quick. The one thing I want to change to this movie, if I was the director, why does it got to be in Philadelphia? And I know Philadelphia is known as like this tough, gritty city, and it kind of fits the mantra of the underdog, but. That's the one thing I wouldn't like.
I mean, as much I'm not necessarily a fan of Philly, being a New York fan myself. I mean, I do feel like it needed to take place in Philadelphia because the Philly fighter is the type of
Pick Cleveland. Pick Cleveland. Yeah, nobody wants to go to Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Nobody does want to go to Cleveland. But a Philly fighter is the type. Joe Frazier is a Philly fighter. Philly fighter is the type of fighter who takes 2 punches to land 1. I mean, that's ultimately who Rocky is. And I feel like you needed to have that in this. So I do feel like it needed to take place in Philadelphia.
Eagles fans, if you're listening, there's 2 things I like about Philadelphia. The cheesesteaks and Rocky, and that's it. That's it. But you guys do have a great movie. But I will say they are the only city that has a fictitious movie character as a statue.
Yeah, I know. It's not like you guys had Joe Frazier come from your city where you could have put that statue up there. We'll throw Rocky up there.
Right. When you come to New York City, you don't see Peter Venkman in the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, you definitely don't see that when you walk into Madison Square Garden.
But so we'll jump ahead now. We're kidding. We're picking on Philadelphia a little too much, but we'll jump ahead to further parts of the movie. And obviously, after the date, Rocky doesn't have his own ice skates. She's on the ice skates. He's fumbling. He doesn't know what he's doing. He talks about how he doesn't want it to affect his fight with the ankles and everything else. And then let's get into some of the more iconic things about this movie before we jump into the montage scene. How about how it started with the meat? Everybody, how many times I've thought about going into a butcher shop and punching the meat in the back because of this movie?
Oh, yeah. It's one of those things that now when you're talking about boxing or boxing movies, it's one of those things that everybody's thinking about. But I think that whole entire scene and the way it was put together was great. Rocky goes there and Paulie's trying to get, not necessarily a hand up, but he's trying to figure out a way that he can make some money off of this fight. And Rocky's not hearing it because, Paulie wasn't there when, not that he wasn't there, but he wasn't there. He wasn't helping Rocky the way he's trying to help him now before he got this shot. And Paulie tries to intimidate him by throwing a couple punches at this meat. And then Rocky turns around and starts unloading on this thing. And there's that great line after Rocky lands about 10 punches or so when Paulie goes, "Oh, calm down, you're going to break its ribs."
Right. Now, do you think that was planned? Or because we talked about later in the movie, we're going to get into it. Do you think that was just kind of off the cuff that they started punching meat? Or do you think that was planned ahead of time? Obviously, you got the chicken scene, too, where he has to chase the chicken.
That's the second one. That's the second one. But I'm not too sure about the meat. I definitely think that that's something that might have been a little improvised on the spot. I mean, it's kind of hard to even think about it now because now you're thinking about something that's just so iconic. Back then, it was just spur of the moment type of thing.
He's literally punching a dead cow with his bare knuckles.
Yeah, and at the end, his knuckles are totally covered in blood. And then you cut to the next time he goes back there, where the news reporter's there and they're showing him do this on national TV. And that's the first time you realize. I mean, I would say it's the first time, but that's the the key part of the movie where you see that Apollo Creed's not taking this serious. Like Rocky's taking this like it's do or die, and Apollo Creed just totally overlooking it. I mean, to the point where Apollo's trainer is even watching Rocky do this, and he realizes that Rocky's, he's serious business right now, and Apollo Creed's just not hearing it. He just overlooks it.
Yeah, that's really the first time in the movie, because obviously we should have talked about that a little as well. Earlier in the movie, you had Apollo Creed. The only reason Rocky got this opportunity was because the guy that was supposed to fight Apollo Creed had to back out. I think he had an injury or something like that. And then he just likes Rocky's nickname, the Italian Stallion. And then he wants to build it around America and everything else. Exactly. And then he comes out, with the American flag and everything else. But he never takes Rocky seriously. For Rocky, like I said, it's kind of the American dream. It's the chance of a lifetime.
It's do or die.
It's his lotto ticket.
It's the only shot he's ever got at doing this, and because of that, he's out there, punching like bags instead of punching heavy bags. He's out there punching huge things of meat and drinking 5 eggs before he goes on long runs.
I think it was 6.
Maybe 6 eggs, whatever. Drinking half a dozen eggs raw, and he's going out there and doing what he's got to do.
Yeah, but the scene with Creed, what you were talking about when what was the name of his trainer? I can't even remember.
I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'd have to look.
That's all right. You don't have to look it up. But then his trainer during that scene, that's really the first time that you really see how lightly Apollo Creed is taking him, and you're starting to see now the trainer's starting to say, we need to start paying more attention to this guy. He's calling him over to watch him on the screen, and as you see Rocky start to punch on the dead cow.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's absolutely iconic scenes. It's the type of thing now that, I mean, God only knows how many times that's been referenced in modern day society. I mean, the punching of the meat in Rocky is just, that's one of those things in this movie that basically has become as iconic as, maybe not as iconic as the music, but I mean, it's right up there. It's one of those things that everybody talks about when you talk about this movie, and when there's a big fight coming up, people are always referencing things like that.
Yeah, and then obviously the other thing we're going to reference before we get into the night before the fight and the fight itself is the thing that most people live for when they watch a Rocky movie, which is the montage scene. And, first off, the drinking of the eggs, I don't know, I would never do that. You got to be crazy. Is there even a benefit? Is there even a benefit to doing that? Why not just scramble them?
I'm not sure why he didn't just scramble.
Is he just that lazy that he wants to?
I guess it makes for a really good shot of getting ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you get the same amount of protein if you scramble them. There's no benefit to doing that, but it just looks cool, I guess. It makes him look tough. But then, you have the whole montage of him. And the interesting fact there, which I had no idea, supposedly from what Greg said, if you map out his route from where his apartment was to the Rocky Steps, it was over 30 miles. Now, of course, he didn't probably run this, but
30.6 miles. 30.6 miles is how long he was supposed to be running from his apartment to the top of those iconic stairs where everybody seems to be running up. And, I mean, that's absolutely amazing. Another interesting thing about the scene is all those shots that you see where they had no permits. There wasn't any plan. They pretty much just drove around in the van, had Stallone in the back and his old ripped up sweats, and they would come to a place and get out, and they'd say to him, get out and start running, and they'd start shooting it. There's even that part where, it's a memorable part where a guy throws an orange at him, and he catches it and keeps running. But that wasn't written at all. That was just something that happened that they caught on tape. I mean, it was just like, and then you put that together with the iconic music that was done by Bill Conti here, which is, like we were saying, is the music that everybody in the world now works out to. And you take all these things and you put them together, and you end up with one of the maybe the most iconic montage ever in the history of movies.
Let me get this straight. And just think about how rude this guy was. Sylvester Stallone's doing his job. He's filming a movie. He's doing his montage. He's running the streets. You have a guy, I guess, that sells oranges. I guess he was not an actor. This was a real life human being, right? He's
just tossing one at him.
He just tosses an orange at him while they're filming. Is this true?
And now this guy is forever, and like I said, one of the biggest montages in the history of cinema.
Who does that? That almost seems too far-fetched for that not to be part of the movie, but I guess he threw an orange at him. But then the other really cool fact about the whole scene is when you see him, the ship in the background, and we were talking about the camera angle. It was what's the name of the camera scene?
Well, it's not a camera scene, but it's what they call
the angle.
It's what they call the still camera. And before this, there was it wasn't introduced. And what it was is that you were able to get those great shots of him running up the stairs and throughout the city and stuff without making it seem like the camera was vibrating. Which before then, that wasn't really there. There was one movie before this that used it, but this was the first movie to really bring it out. And I mean, now it's something that's used in every single movie. The Shining is another movie that used it in order to get those great shots of going around the Overlook Hotel. But before this movie, that did not exist, and this pretty much put it on the map, which is definitely a major thing in terms of the way this movie influenced future cinema.
Right. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The montage is everything else, and then you get to what I think is one of the most important scenes of the movie. And we were obviously talking about how important Adrian is to Rocky. That's what his life ends up being about, right?
It's the heart and soul.
The heart and soul of the movie.
The movie is definitely Adrian and Rocky's relationship, without a doubt.
Yeah, and then that scene, he's in bed the night before the fight, and he's telling her, basically, he's got no chance, and he's kind of starting to have doubts. And he tells her, and as a kid, you're watching this, you're saying, he's the good guy. The good guy's going to win. And you find out then and there that for him, winning is just getting the opportunity and going the distance. It's in his head. He says, I don't care if I lose. I just want to prove myself. I want to prove the doubters wrong. I want to prove people that I belong in that ring with the best that's ever done it.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely it's probably the best scene in the movie. Maybe not the most iconic, maybe not the most memorable, but that was actually another scene. That was actually a scene that they were originally trying to cut, and Stallone fought to have it in the movie, and I think that was absolutely needed. And I think that's really, that movie pretty much defines what Rocky is. He's the person that, he's going out there against, the unsurmountable odds, and maybe he's not going to win the fight, but he's going to be standing there at the end of the fight. And I mean, sometimes that's what you got to do for greatness. It's not necessarily about the victory.
Right, and like we've said throughout this entire podcast, it really is the ultimate underdog story. You can't get more of an underdog story, and as you're watching that, there's more character development, I guess you could say, and obviously you're starting to see the relationship forming, and then that kind of takes us to the fight night, which is where you really see it on full display. You even up until really the second round, Apollo Creed is still taking this man for granted. Before he even gets in, Rocky comes out. First off, he's wearing the robe with pulleys. Yeah. He's got pulleys, meat packing. It looks like it was like a cardboard box sewn on the back of his
it looks
trunks.
like a lucky shamrock, which is something you would normally put on the back of an Irishman fighter, you'd think. And obviously Rocky's the Italian stallion, and Rocky, on top of that, he's also wearing these beat up robes. He's coming out to no music, and then yet again, to prove how overlooked he is, you go on the other side where Apollo Creed gets introduced, and he comes out dressed as Christopher Columbus, throwing I don't know what something to the fans and getting everybody all fired up. He's not even thinking about Rocky on the other side of the ring. He's an afterthought. This is the Apollo Creed show at this point.
Yeah, it's basically like we were saying earlier. It's kind of like going to watch Michael Jordan play the Knicks. Like or LeBron James now play the Knicks. Like the outcome. You're there to see the greatest that's ever done it, and that's basically the feeling in the arena right then and there. They're there to see Apollo Creed. They're not there to see the fight. This is going to be a joke. He's going to run him over. Apollo Creed believes that, and he's going in all cocky, and you see Rocky focused and ready to go.
And there's even that one scene that's actually, it's right before this, right? It's, the night before again, where Rocky shows up to the arena and he's looking at the huge poster they have blown up on him, and he says to the promoter, they got it wrong. My colors are reversed. My trunks in real life are going to be the reverse colors. And the promoter goes, does it really make a difference?
Yeah, and there you go again doubting him, basically saying you're going to be an afterthought after this fight, and just feeding into that underdog mentality. And then they touch gloves, the fight starts, and at the beginning of the first round, you see Apollo Creed dancing around,
basically playing with him at that point,
playing with him, and then trying to make the fight longer, make it a show.
He's basically jabbing him. He's keeping him at a distance with jab after jab after jab, and what happens is eventually Rocky slips one of those jabs, lands a freaking nice punch across the chin, and drops Apollo Creed for the first time in the movie and in Apollo Creed's career.
Yeah, and I remember when I watched that. The fight should have been over there, by the way. The referee took 20 seconds to start the count. He's looking at Rocky for like 20 seconds, doesn't start the count, but it is what it is. He gets back up, and then that's when it becomes a fight. That's when Apollo finally gives him respect and starts to take this seriously and brings the heat. And because that was the first time Apollo was ever knocked down.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first time Apollo even realized that he was in the ring with another fighter, as far as I'm concerned, throughout the movie. You know, the first time he realized that he was showing up for a fight and not a show.
Yeah, and then obviously, and the other really funny thing about this, and you don't really realize it until you watch the movie again, because obviously you remember the fight. You think of it as being like a full-length fight. The footage of the fight might have been 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's very short. Actually, I mean, I paused it last night when I was watching it to get ready for this podcast. I paused it right before right before he's about to get introduced, and there's only 19 minutes left in the whole entire movie, and that's including closing credits. So it's called 16 minutes or something about. And you figure you got the introductions, Apollo Creed comes out, it's Christopher Columbus, all that stuff. By the time the fight actually starts, you probably got 10 minutes left in the whole movie.
Right. At most 8-9 minutes. Basically, the amount of time that they spent on the ice skating rink was what they filmed in terms of the boxing match. But it was incredible. Obviously, it's a great scene, and you feel the momentum shift after that. He goes to his corner after the first round because obviously Apollo had said he's going to put him down in round 3, taking it as a joke, trying to put on a show, and that's when his trainer finally lights into him and he says, "It's time to wake up, Apollo. You got to put this guy down." And then they go back and forth for a 15-round match because, of course, back then it wasn't 12 rounds.
No, yeah, back then wasn't that 12-round stuff. But I mean, also, when you're looking at this movie, you got to realize how great this last scene is. I mean, they put this together. Before this, there wasn't boxing scenes like this in movies. I mean, the boxing scenes you saw in movies would be, they pretty much, if you watch them now, they'd pretty much be considered jokes. This scene, Carl Weathers and Sylvester Stallone spent 4 weeks choreographing in order to make it look as realistic as possible. And I mean, it's like one of those things that now every boxing movie since then has been doing. But I mean, this is the movie that came up with that. This is the first movie to take the scene that seriously, and because of that, even though it's only a 10-minute scene, people think about this as pretty much being a full-length fight. There's a lot of people out there. You ask the best boxing fighter of all time, they're gonna say Creed Balboa.
Yeah, because that's how seriously they took the movie, and it definitely was a great way to end it. And then you get towards the end, and it skips from the second round really to the last round, or the second to last round. Then you see Rocky in his corner, and he tells Mick to cut his eye because he can't see out of it. Yeah. And both corners going into the 15th round are basically saying, stop the fight. We can't go on anymore because it's a bloodbath. And then they go out there. They go back and forth for the 15th round. Rocky continues to throw his body blows. Creed continues to hit him in the face. And they wrap up the fight.
It basically ends. Fight basically ends with Rocky having Creed on the run, and then the way it seems is that if there was another 10, maybe 15 seconds in the fight, Rocky wins by KO. But I mean, what it really comes down to, though, at the end of this movie, like we've been saying, isn't necessarily whether or not Rocky wins the fight. And I think the way that they show that at the end of this is so great, is that by, when they're it ends up being a split decision, but the only reason you even know that is because it's in the background. When this fight's all said and done and Rocky's in the ring, the only thing he cares about is Adrian. He doesn't care about the winning or losing. You barely even hear them announce the winner of the fight. It's all in the background. All that matters at that point is Adrian and the fact that Rocky was still standing there, like what he was saying to her the night before.
Yeah, I think the way that they filmed that at the end just goes to show you what is really important to him. In his life, you're seeing it from his perspective, and like you said, he just went up against the greatest fighter ever. It's a split decision. We're not talking about he knows he lost. He could have easily won the fight. And he doesn't care. He's not even listening to that. He wants to see his wife. He wants to celebrate the fact that he was able to do something historic and prove people wrong, that he actually meant something.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely great scene, all the way down to the last possible second, with the way they freeze frame it at the end. I mean, they cue the music, the dun, dun, dun. I mean, one of the greatest, maybe the greatest ending in the history of sports movies, one of the greatest endings in the history of movies, I'm going to say.
I mean, I'd have to think about that. I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot more sports movies. There's a lot of good ones, but this is definitely probably my top sports movie. I mean, there's a bunch of other great ones, but this is definitely up there. And then that obviously turns you to Rocky 2, and then and then they made 40 more. But this is by far, and I know Rocky 2 is kind of an extension of Rocky 1, but in my opinion, this is by far the best Rocky movie.
Yeah, and then, I mean, all the Rockies to come after that, they pretty much almost became a joke until you got the 6, which was 30 years later. I mean, that 6 was pretty decent, and then you had the Creed movies, which I'd say were very good. But yeah, I mean, nothing maybe the first Creed, but besides that, nothing even comes within even close to capturing the magic of the original Rocky. And that's not just for the Rocky franchises. I mean, there's not too many sports movies that capture that magic.
There's not too many movies. Just the whole story, start to finish, the character development. You see how they both change as people, not just through the first one, but throughout the series. How they both mature as a couple, and they, like you said at the beginning, they're kind of both. One strength's the other's weakness, and they both become better people because of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the heart and soul of this movie. As much as people want to talk about being a sports movie, it is a great love story also, and that's one of the things that people, I feel like, often overlook in this movie. But I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I absolutely loved watching it again for the 9,000th time and talking about it, and I thought this was a very appropriate movie to do. For the first podcast for the movie channel, being that I'm a sports channel, being that who doesn't like Rocky, and I just thought it'd be a really good discussion. So I was looking forward to talking about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We're definitely gonna be doing some more sports movies, and before we probably venture out to other genres. But obviously I'm a sports channel. I know a lot of you guys probably are fans of sports movies. So if you could do us a favor in the comments below, list some movies that you'd like us to go over, and if you haven't done so, please subscribe, ring the bell, and thank you guys for checking out the channel. Greg, any last words?
None. Had a great time. Hope to hear from you guys soon. Hope to be back doing a couple more movies for you guys. I enjoyed it a lot, Chris.
And as always, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.